Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest-running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
In today's episode 303, we interview Steph Brake and Lauren Thomas about their recent fundraising hike in Tasmania titled The Tassie Backbone. We hope you enjoy. Before we get into today's episode, if you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. On the 21st of October 2024, Lauren Thomas and Steph Brake started on their 40-day, 500-kilometre journey, starting at the northern Tasmanian township of Penguin and finishing at Cockle Bay in the state's south. This journey was designed to raise awareness and fund for men's health, which we were both deeply motivated to do. They finally achieved their goal on 29th of November. Lauren, Steph, thanks for coming on our podcast to talk about your recent journey.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, now before we get on to the journey itself, give us a bit of a background on yourselves. Are you hikers or is this a bit outside your comfort zone?
So I will be honest, I have not done an overnight hike in a good 10 years before this. So I used to do a lot of hiking when I was living in Tasmania, but now that I'm over in Western Australia, a lot of the majority of my hiking has been coming from my exploration work as a geologist, walking around outcrops and spending a lot of time in the field. So this was just throwing myself right back into the thick of it.
And for me, Steph, I'm a pretty avid hiker and have been for most of my adult life. I've done some overseas hiking trips, but I mostly have been exploring the playground that is Tasmania. It's a bit of a hiker's paradise down here. This is definitely the biggest trek that I've undertaken, but there's been lots of hikes in the last 10 years or so that have prepared me for this one. Everything from the three capes, the bougie experiences to scrub bashing in the southwest and everything in between.
So how did you then get convinced to do a 500-kilometre walk?
I think that's in Lauren's nature, to say yes to these things before she realises what she's getting into. And she's been saying yes to this idea that I've been pitching for over 10 years, I think. So I don't know if she really had an out because she's been saying yes for a long time.
Now let's talk about the Tassie Backbone. Where did the name come from?
It has been a walk that's been 10 years in the making. I was exploring Tasmania in my early 20s and I had a big map on my wall of Tasmania and was always flagging and tagging different walks. And I sat back one day and thought about how there's these great sort of multi-day hikes that join up and it really goes down the mountainous spine of Tasmania. So it's really that phrasing, the mountainous spine or the Tassie Backbone, that's how it got its name. But I think since then it's the spinal metaphors have really tied in well with everything we've done. And Lauren's come up with some really great one-liners to give the Tassie Backbone some life. This
journey came about as a fundraiser, I believe?
Yeah, so once Steph had me on board for the hike, she said, pitched, would you be interested in doing it for a cause? And we talked about the times of year and when it could be, and we'd talked about whether to do it at the start of the early in the year, sort of March towards the end of the hot weather, or in November. And I've fundraised for November for the past 5 years prior to this. It's a cause that's very close to my heart. And I know, Steph, we talked about it and we said, we'd love to do something towards suicide prevention. And Movember just sort of really fit the bill for both of us.
I was going to say you did this as a fundraiser for Movember, and most people are used to people growing mustaches for fundraisers. And I must admit, I think it's a fashion I could quite do without. How did you decide to do a walk? I mean, obviously growing mustaches is probably going to be a really hard thing, but how do you go about deciding we'll do a walk instead?
Knowing that, I guess we always we'll always have this idea of doing this walk, the Tassie Backbone, and it would be this big adventure. It was certainly for me always a nod to my dad who did die by suicide when he was just 36. So, and I very much got my adventurous spirit from him. So tying this crazy idea to traverse the mountainous spine of Tasmania with raising funds and awareness for men's mental health really just fit so well together. And Lauren had a lot of experience with fundraising for Movember in the past. So it really was a combination of fitting the walk together with the cause, and it worked very well.
Okay, so as of yesterday, when I looked up at on your fundraising site, you'd raised just over $22,000 for men's health, which, considering your goal was $20,000, I think you've overachieved there, which is good. Can people still contribute if they want to? And what's the last date that they can provide some donations if they feel like it?
So Movember run a fundraising challenge throughout the campaign season, and this closes on the 13th of December. If people would like to donate to us specifically, they can donate before the 13th of December, but donations can be made to Movember all throughout the year. The cause is always ongoing and always seeking fundraising.
What I'll go through and do is I'll put the fundraising link on the show notes for this episode. So if people do want to contribute, they can go on there and go through to Steph's and Lauren's fundraising site and contribute. Okay, so you'd planned this walk as a 40-day, 500-kilometre roughly trip. Why such a big walk? Why not bite off a smaller trip?
Well, I'd always planned to do this big walk as part of some long service leave that never eventuated. Often on a week-long hike, I feel like you've had a month off because time really does slow down a bit. And so I was certainly keen to make this quite an extended walk with lots of opportunity to enjoy each day. So while the walk probably could have been done in less time, and certainly has been done by other people in less time, Lauren and I really wanted to enjoy the side trips, enjoy the campsites, allow for some contingency and just immerse ourselves in the experience rather than rushing to clock the kilometres, so to speak. So the 40-day time frame was very much to allow, around 15 kilometres a day and have lots of time and space to enjoy what each day was going to throw at us.
Okay, yeah, no, I must admit, it's you either go hard and fast and finish it in a fairly short period, or you take the time, enjoy it a bit more, and it's a matter of deciding where in that sort of category you fit.
That's right.
Now let's get on to logistics. Given this was a Movember activity, the timing of this worked out quite well because you were really coming into the hotter months of the year. So I'm sure while you had every sort of weather under the sun, what was the weather generally good?
Yeah, it was. We were actually really lucky. We experienced all sorts of spring weather, that typical 4 seasons in one day. But as a whole, we never had large days where there was rain from the beginning to the end of the day, or we didn't really have a lot of time where it was horrible weather continually for any great period, and it made for the experience. I think you appreciate the sunshine so much more when you've had a bit of rain or a bit of wind or a bit of snow even.
Yeah.
And spring certainly appealed because there's generally lots of more water sources. As Lauren said, there's been more rain. My experience is that the snakes haven't been as aggressive on the spring side of the season. Still pre-bushfire season as well. And usually, and certainly our experience was that the flora was just growing on steroids. It was just wildflowers for days, which made it for a very diverse and interesting landscape to walk through too.
I must admit, and I know it's just a It's just a weird attitude, I suppose, but I just don't associate Tasmania with the bushfires. And I know they do get bushfires, but you tend to think of it as being a cool climate area, lots of rain, not big, dry, grassy, open plains like you can get in some of the northern states. But yeah, I was surprised a few years ago to discover they can have quite serious bushfires at times.
Yeah, I'm a volunteer firefighter, and we've certainly had some rough run, especially with dry lightning strikes as well. We don't get the big dry storms as much, but it's a real risk to be aware of when bushwalking in Tasmania, especially on the button grass plains.
Now, how did you decide on the start date and the finish date? I mean, obviously Movember, so you were trying to do Movember through here, but was there a reason for picking the start and finish date that you did?
That was a good one, actually. I'm not sure I actually put too much extra thought into it to what we probably needed, but we had a mutual friend that got married the weekend before we started, and so I think it was as simple as we'll both be in Tasmania in the same end of the state on around the 21st of October. Let's give ourselves a day to recover from the wedding and then set off, which probably wasn't enough time. But that was as simple as it was for the start date. With the goal of finishing close to the end of the November month.
All right. And I was going to say, I thought there'd been some in-depth planning here to sort of finish this by the end of November. But as you say, it's sort of you take the opportunities you can when you can.
That's right.
Now, before this interview, I had never heard of the township of Penguin. How did you decide on this as a start and finish point? Because in all honesty, most people would think, okay, let's start in Devonport or one of the major towns. Was it just a matter of convenience that's where you happen to be, or was there a deliberate choice for choosing Penguin?
Well, the Penguin Cradle Trail was the first set multi-day walk that we were doing. So the Penguin Cradle Trail does start in Penguin and finishes Cradle Mountain. So that was quite easy in terms of finishing. Many people would probably be familiar with the Tasmanian Trail, which does start in Devonport and is a much bigger trail that passes through townships and uses a lot more roads all the way to Dover. So there is another walk, but it is very different and open more for trail riding and bikes and such, whereas the Penguin Cradle Trail, which was the start, was very much a hiker's bushwalk. So that was how we started, and we picked our coast points.
Okay. So from there, then you went. So you went Penguin Cradle, and I'm guessing it was on to the overland track from there.
Yes, that's right. Yes, so there are 4 good multi-day walks that sort of joined up with this, with some untracked sections in the middle. So the Penguin Cradle Trail is about 80 kilometres. That starts at the coast and finishes at Cradle Mountain, which conveniently is where the overland track starts, which is another approximately sort of 80-kilometre walk that finishes at Lake St Clair. And then that's where we had to come up with a bit of a plan for the middle section, being the trickiest, with no tracked areas, very remote, rugged wilderness. And then we were able to move on to where Lake Pedder is in the southwest, and the Port Davey track passes through the foothills of the Western Arthurs. And then that conveniently meets up with Melaleuca, which is the start of the South Coast track.
Okay. And from that now, so you actually did the South Coast track as part of this walk, or was that you just connected through Melaleuca? Yes,
we did the South Coast track. That's where we finished.
That's a good hard walk to finish it off with.
Yes, yeah. The podcast you did on it was a great source of information to prep us. We were doing lots of research, and while there wasn't as many publicly available information on the whole traverse of Tasmania, and that the podcast you did on the South Coast track was a good source to prepare us for the mud.
Well, I must admit, I mean, when I did go through and do that, I was expecting a much muddier experience, and I think they've gone through and improved it and added boardwalks in the worst of the sections. But yeah, I had one instance where I was basically crotch deep in mud, and yeah, it's. I'm just glad I had gaiters on, otherwise I would have lost my footwear in the mud. So.
Yes, we had a few near misses ourselves.
How did you decide on the average distance? Was it just that 40 days seemed like a reasonable sort of thing without pushing it too hard, or was it just that this was the time you had available and you wanted to make the most use of it?
Well, one of the main sources of information we got on this traverse of Tasmania was from a very avid hiker, Becca Lunnan, who's got a great blog, Rock Monkey Adventures, and she's done the same walk with a friend, and they did it in approximately just over 3 weeks. But we looked at the kilometres that they had done, and they were really big days and covering the kilometres quite quickly. So we wanted to very much extend out our time, and so that's where we worked out that, an average distance of anywhere between sort of 10, 12, 15 kilometres a day with a couple of big days pushed out the time frame fairly extensively to more like 6 weeks. And that also allowed for us to have a couple of rest days in between the different multi-day walks, which allowed us some time to have, a hot shower and a resupply of food and fresh clothes, and just give the backs a little bit of a break and the legs a bit of a break from walking before progressing on to the next part of the walk.
And did you walk the entire distance, or did you use other means of propulsion as well?
We did not. We actually used some other means of propulsion. I don't know how familiar you are with the overland track and the last day from Narcissus Hut to Cynthia Bay that goes around the edge of Lake Sinclair.
Yep.
Well, I have an aversion to that track, a very, very strong aversion. And I believe Steph feels the same way.
Oh, yes. It's a lot of tree roots.
It's very, it's not particularly an appealing walk. So we organised some friends to bring in kayaks, and we actually kayaked Lake Sinclair with a side trip up Mount Ida, which is a mountain that's been on my bucket list for a long, long time. And because it's mostly, you're only able to get to it by kayak. Most people kayak across the lake and then hike up Ida and stay the night and then kayak back out. But we were very fortunate that our weather was absolutely perfect, so we were able to kayak and climb Ida at the same time. And then another thing we both really don't like the idea of is road walking. So, yes, very unappealing being beside or on a road. I don't know how familiar you are with Tasmanian highways. The rural highways, there's not really a verge. You are basically on the road. And we sort of thought, how can we avoid spending as much time how can we have as little time as possible walking along the highway? So we organised for some push bikes. So we push biked from Lake Sinclair down to Lake King William, which was all highway and then forestry road. And then again, we biked from Adamsfield, which is near Lake Gordon, around down past Mount Anne and around Lake Pedder and down to the start of the Port Davey track, which was about 60 kilometres. And Steph and I are not particularly strong cyclists, so that was probably one of our most challenging days, actually.
But the idea for us to do the Tassie Backbone, we knew we weren't going to be breaking any speed records or distance records with this, but we liked the idea of being able to say that we got from the top to the bottom under our own steam, without the use of transport as such. So Lauren was really great at coming up with some creative alternatives that made it a very varied and very interesting ways to propel ourselves down.
It sounds like an interesting track, actually. I mean, I started and didn't complete the Tasmanian track a few years ago and got caught up with COVID by the end of it. And I think if I went back and completed that, I probably would do it on push bike, I think, because there are a lot of verge walking and road walking. And it's, as you say, it's really, you're having to walk right on the edge of the road in most cases and just keep an ear out for any traffic coming along. And
Tasmania is notorious for having an exorbitant amount of roadkill, which is quite unpleasant.
Yes, I certainly noticed that. I must admit, I'm so used to wombats, dead wombats on the side of the road in New South Wales. Down in Tasmania, it seems to be dead wallabies are the roadkill of choice down there. So,
yes.
Okay, now, in regards to your accommodation option, did you tent it for a lot of the nights, or were you also staying in some sort of formal accommodation?
So for our hiking on the trail, we were in tents almost every night. our exception to that was the Overland Track, which has these beautiful huts that have been provided by parks and wildlife, and they're just amazing. The new huts have so many facilities, and it was really hard to turn down the idea of heating and some camaraderie in the hut, meeting other people on the trail. But for the rest of our walk, we were tenting it, and then our rest days we had a combination of roomed accommodation, so we were able to get a little bit of a hot shower at Cradle Mountain and again at Lake Sinclair. And then we were surprised by one of our mates at Huon River Campground. He'd come up and set up camp for us with another hot shower, although this one was a bit more DIY, being a shower tent. And he cooked us a hot meal, and it was really wonderful. It was a nice change up for us just before we started off on the Port Davey. And then our last rest day, which was at Melaleuca, we stayed in the bushwalking hut, which you would be familiar with, I believe, Tim.
Yeah, we flew into Melaleuca and we went up and had a look at the huts, but we started walking off that as soon as we landed by plane. But yeah, I know a lot of people do actually decide to sleep there the first night before they kick off. So, but I think one of the things with Tasmania that I do like is the extremely long days. And I think, you know, when I did the South Coast track, which was in late November, early December, I think the sun set at about 9 o'clock. So you've got good long days if you want to walk that distance and that sort of length of time. Okay, now what key pieces of equipment were you carrying? And I'll start with you first, Lauren. What were your go-to things like your shelter, pack, and sleeping bag?
So my shelter was a Wilderness Equipment second arrow tent. I wanted a bit of a spacious place for myself to camp in the evening. My pack is a One Planet Macmillan that I've owned for over 15 years now, but I will be replacing it with something lighter, having seen what is available now and the pack that Steph has. My sleeping bag was a Cedar Summit Spark 9, just simply because I wanted to be able to make sure I stayed warm. And that was perfect through the alpine regions and potentially a little bit too warm for the south coast, but open her up and it's great.
And what was your average pack weight for the trip? Did you measure that at all?
Yes, we did. My average pack weight for each leg was between 20 and 24 kilos. So it's quite heavy for me. I'm only 62 kilos, so that's about 37% of my body weight.
That's a good weight for someone that weighs that little. So.
I definitely felt it. So as I said, I will be looking into a new pack.
All right. And Steph?
So my shelter was a Mont Moondance 4-season. It was only a one-person tent, but it was pretty good for a one-person tent. I did a lot of research around tents and really struggled to find one that, you know, just ticked all the boxes. So I ended up aiming for something with really high waterproofing rating and low weight. I was very motivated by those sort of two factors. It served up really well, but definitely, you know, having seen the lightweightness of two-person tents and having that extra room, I think that's sort of my next upgrade. The pack was, again, really motivated by waterproofing and weight. So I had to retire my old canvas Mac Pack one. It had all my patches on it, had all the sentimental value, and I thought this might have been its last hurrah, but I did end up replacing it with a Whipper Wallamai. So that was real pub-style backpack with not as much framing around it, and that went really great. I actually had to have neurosurgery on my spine just over 12 months ago, so I was very conscious of keeping the weight down and looking after my spine post surgery. So that worked out really well. My sleeping bag was a Cedar Summit Aspect 9. Cedar Summit were fantastic with they sponsored our trip and donated a huge amount of gear. So I was really chuffed to get a new Cedar Summit sleeping bag for us. Mine, surprisingly, I wasn't expecting this, but I had the foot zip, which I never really put much thought into, but geez, it was great. Around the camp, I fondly became known as the green grub because I could clip my sleeping bag up around my shoulders and then have my feet out with my Crocs to walk around camp with. And that was also good when it got a bit warmer. I could stick my feet out the bottom as well. So that was fantastic.
Yeah.
And overall,
I was going to say, I think that's the thing. It's sort of, you can go ultralight, and quite often the lighter the sleeping bag, the less features tend to be on it. But having the ability to zip open various parts of the bag, and particularly the foot box, it makes a huge difference in versatility.
Yes, that's right. So there's some very amusing photos on the internet of me sitting around camp in a Michelin Man looking green sleeping bag. And my overall pack weight was about 18 kilos to start with, and then with gradually working through 5 to 6 kilos of food, it got lighter and lighter each day. And then depending on what the track was each day, it was sometimes 1 to 2 kilos of water carrying, but there were lots of good spots to fill up, so we didn't have to carry lots of extra weight on the waterfront, which was good. And yeah, that worked out really well. And I did a lot of pack training. Actually, took some advice from you, Tim, and pack trained with a much heavier pack, so I didn't notice the weight as much, which was good.
No. I was going to say, how many days of food were you typically carrying at a time? You're obviously not going to be carrying 40 days of food in one hit, but what was it, 6 to 8 to 10 days worth of food at a time, or?
Yes, so that we approximately had a food drop every sort of 7 to 10 days. In the early parts of the walk, we got some extra ones where people came in to support on the side trip. So that was fantastic to be able to have some people come and drop some extra food in on the overland track and the Penguin Cradle Trail. But yeah, every 7 to 10 days or so, we were able to get fresh food, gas, clothes. So we didn't have to carry too much at once.
No, that sounds fair enough. And by the sound of it, so you're looking roughly around about 600 to 700 grams of dry weight food per day by the sound of it?
Yeah, that's right. And it was a bit heavier to start with. I tended to eat my apples and carrots and heavier low-calorie food in the first 3 days just to motivated to get the weight down.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's sort of, I love my food, there's no doubt about that, and it's I'll only carry things I like eating, but I think I've got myself down to around about 650 grams per day of dry weight of food. And but having said that, I average losing about 3 kilos a week for each week that I'm hiking. So it's a good weight loss journey. Or at least for men anyway. Women seem to tone up, but they don't seem to lose the amount of weight that males do. So
the metabolism's a little bit different between men and women. I certainly had a little bit extra to lose and have managed to lose about 7 kilos over 6 weeks.
That's all right. That's always it's always a good way to tone up. There's no doubt about that. Did you have any times where you had meals in towns as you were passing through, or really you didn't have much of an opportunity for that?
We had a few meals on our rest days, but that was really only Cradle and Lake Sinclair. Otherwise, we didn't pass through any towns. We were just all quite remote. It was a lot of backcountry cuisine for us.
Yeah, no, it's sort of, I think that's often the thing, that you either design a walk that you do sort of pass through a town every 7 to 8 days, a bit like the Bibbulmun track, or then you get the other end of the walks where you've got to pretty much carry everything or cache food as you go. So now, I believe you had a bit of fun on this journey with some of the more imaginative pieces of gear you were carrying. Now, what was that?
Just to bring a little bit of laughter and humour to our Movember advocacy, we decided to walk the overland track dressed as Mario and Luigi, which provided great laughs for everyone passing us on the trail. So we did dress up and give everybody a bit of a laugh.
I was going to say, did you lose the costumes after that walk?
We did, yes. We left our costumes at the end of the overland track. We felt like taking them into the Denison and the untracked wilderness might not be the best idea. Cotton overalls, while they're quite comfy to walk in when they're dry, are not so fun wet.
No. I think you're okay if you're in the middle of summer and you're trying to cool yourself down. But Tasmania tends to be a bit variable on its hiking conditions.
It does, yes.
We got a bit creative with the nature mows, though, while we were trying to find ways to weave the Movember work into each of the hikes. There's some great photos again of fern leaf mows and mud mows, and getting a bit imaginative with that. And it's certainly even just using a good old eyeliner pencil for us females who don't always have the ability to grow a hairy lip. And it was a great conversation starter, particularly on the overland track where there were more people. We were very moved and motivated by how many people stopped to ask us about the questions, and we had some great moments of connection with people that we were travelling alongside with who were doing the track at the same time, and it was a great way to start the advocacy conversation around Movember.
Okay, now at least in regard to the overland track and the South Coast track, there's pretty much a maximum number of people you're going to see starting on any given day. Were you coming across people quite regularly on the trail, or were you having areas where it was pretty quiet and you didn't see anyone at all apart from each other?
Well, the Penguin Cradle Trail we spent mostly alone. We did meet some lovely people who camped with us one night at Paddy's Tarn. But most of that, we didn't really see a single other soul. And then obviously the overland track limited to 32 people per day. And we were lucky that we were walking with a much smaller number of 18. And they were great company. And then for the port day, the Southwest, obviously it was just us. And then the Port Davey, we actually had Steph's husband and another of our friends come join us. Which was a great company, but we really didn't run into many other people. We met a whole bunch of people doing the Western Arthur circuit, but we seemed to be the only ones in a little while that were keen for the Port Davey. And we, of course, met quite a few people at Melaleuca. Par Avion do flights into there. So we had a few people coming in for day visits and a few people starting the South Coast track as well. And we were lucky to be joined by a couple more friends for that section. And we were lucky to be ahead of a guided group on the Southwest.
We also got to experience something that was a bit rare for the overland track, which was that in the same timing of the huts and the walking that we were doing, there was a father and his adult daughter who had her service dog with her. And I think there's only been a very small handful number of canines that have walked the overland track, but there was this beautiful little Labradoodle called Lenny, who accompanied us, and I think he became everybody's service assistance dog, because it was just fantastic to have this beautifully trained, lovely natured dog that was always up for pats and cuddles at the end of each day, and provided a lot of entertainment.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not common to see, or in most cases you don't see dogs in national parks, and even when you do, I don't think I've ever come across one on a track. So it is a rare sort of thing, and I've only ever seen one dog, but that was in state forests where they're allowed in New South Wales. But it is a rare thing. There's no doubt about that. Now, what was the trail tread like? Obviously, when you're dealing with things like the South Coast track and the overland, you've got natural trail. But were you pretty much on? Given that you were pretty much dealing with hiking trails with just a few connecting points, was it very much natural trail, or was it? I'm guessing you would have had, when you were doing the cycling, you would have had at least management roads. So, what was the typical trail tread?
It was definitely mostly natural for a lot of it. So we were very lucky. The Penguin Cradle Trail has been upkept by the Northwest Coast Bushwalking Club, and they've done an amazing job. So that trail is in quite good condition, but it's all rocky and mud a little bit, although nothing like the mud that we encountered on the Port Davey track, which Steph's husband Sam affectionately termed the Port Davey suggestion, as more often than not we were busy going, is this still the track? As we pushed our way through and encountered bog that was up to our waist in some point. So it was kind of all right, we'll just see if we can find a way through. As you say, we were cycling on forestry roads and a bit of bitumen for some of that. And then the South Coast track, as you know, it's more of a natural, and there's a fair bit of duck boarding in there now. It's actually a lot less muddy than what we encountered on the Port Davey. And then our section that's untracked was just untracked. It was scrub bashing. And how can I describe that? It's like trying to push your way through almost up on like a 70-degree incline through scrub that's so thick you're trying to reef it apart and pull yourself up. You know, the average speed of a walker through this area is 1 kilometre per hour. And I think, what did we manage to get, Steph?
Oh, I think at some points it was 400 to 500 meters per hour, because the scrub was incredibly thick and spiky and very uphill in places. So yeah, it was definitely an assault from the foliage.
Yeah, I think I must admit I have done some bush bashing, but it's not my first choice. I'd rather use fixed trail, and every so often you come across a section that's a bit overgrown. But yeah, it's when you have to bash your way through the bush. It's not my favourite option. Now I'll just change tacks here slightly. You mentioned thinking about whether you're actually on trail or not because of the terrain. What navigation options did you use? And having now done the trip, what would you recommend?
So we took a map and a compass with us. I used to be a scout, so every good scout always takes that with them. The other thing we both had was a Garmin InReach, which had our map and was able to use as a GPS. And also we had a GPX file, which was provided by Becca, who had previously done this Tassie Traverse. And I would definitely recommend for the Port Davey taking a GPS, and the South Coast track as well, taking a GPS with you, so that those times where you suddenly, there's a lot of trails, false trails, because people go, oh, I think that might be it. And then the next person goes, oh, maybe that's in it. And it just gets reinforced. And we certainly found for the Port Davey, there were sections where we weren't really sure if we were on it or off it, and we definitely got lost a few times. We spent a good hour trying to find the track. At one point near Spring River, a river had come up and was flooding the track, so we ended up bush bashing our way through Tea Tree. I definitely recommend making sure that you have both a paper map, so in case technology fails, but also some technology to help guide you.
Yeah, I think, I was very much aware of the Port Davey track, and it doesn't seem to be as heavily used as the South Coast track. So I'd expect it to be, in some respects, I'd expect it to be a bit more pristine, but also less infrastructure, which means you would potentially be having a bit more muddy areas. And the Penguin Trail, I only discovered that it existed on about 3 or 4 days ago when I was talking to somebody else who said they'd done it. So, you're the second people within a week that have talked about this trail that I'd never heard of before. So it sounds like an interesting one.
It really is, and the Northwest Walking Club, who have constructed it and maintained it for many decades now, have done an enormous amount of work to make it really quite accessible. They do have on their website as well, you can request maps and a track book, and so we did get that in advance, and that was really fantastic, because it's often quite difficult to get the 1 to 25,000 scale maps. So they provide really good information and really detailed track options as well, depending on if you want to do it in a shorter time frame or can go down all of the side trips that are along the way, and all those campsites as well. So, in addition to that, the navigation options in terms of research on that, the Penguin Cradle Trail was really fantastic in terms of resources of track notes, knowing when you were off track and what the options were.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Now, describe a typical day on trail, starting with getting up in the morning to going to bed at night time.
Well, my day, I would wake, I would hear the sound of and know, all right, Steph's up, I need to get up, and we'll start moving. We would get up, do our breakfast, pack down tents, have a nice cup of coffee, and then head off on the trail, walking for anywhere between 4 to 6, 7 hours for the day. We'd stop for lunch and a few snacks along the way, and just to enjoy the views and enjoy just generally being in nature. Steph's a little bit of a fitter hiker than I am, so she's just powering up hills and very kindly waiting for me at the top as I slogged my way up. And then we'd get to our campsite, set up, have a hot drink, enjoy the bird song and the evening lights. And I don't think we made many sunsets. I'm pretty sure we were in bed before most of them, hey, Steph?
That's right. I think, as you were saying before, Tim, the 9 o'clock sunsets meant that we were often well and truly asleep, snoring before nightfall.
Yeah, I must admit, for me, I like to actually make camp and have eaten by the time it gets dark. But when it's getting dark at 9 o'clock at night, or even 8:30, I think I tend to walk as far as I can and start looking for a campsite probably around about an hour and a half before it's going to get dark. But I think I'd be tempted in that sort of situation to keep on walking through till about 7:30 while the opportunity was there. But as you said, you decided you were going to take it a bit more leisurely, and if you got the time, why not?
Yes, and our evening rituals were really lovely. I actually really enjoyed getting to camp with a few more extra daylight hours. It did mean that we often got to go for a bit of an explore where there was generally a fresh water source near all the campsites. So being able to go and find those and have a bit of a clean up. There was usually some sort of form of leech bite count involved as well.
Yes.
Poor Lauren copped the brunt of that, and that for every one I had, I think she had about 8 over the course of the trail. And so there was often a lot of story swapping and cooking and looking over the different photos that we'd taken each day as well. And sharing those moments, which was really nice. And we took a few forms of entertainment with us. We had often a pack of cards or phase 10 cards as well, and we had a few more people around to play, which was great. And that I took watercolours, which meant we got the chance to be a bit creative and do a bit of artwork and journaling as well with the extra daylight, which was always very, very lovely, very cathartic and relaxing to be able to do some writing or journaling or a bit of artwork alongside as well. And then we were often doing some funny photo shoots of some kind with the Movember flag, because we were doing the advocacy. So we often were setting up to make the campsite a pleasant place and taking some nice photos and really taking the time to enjoy the space each night we were there.
Now, what about the wildlife and vegetation? I mean, it would have obviously varied from the top of Tasmania to the bottom, but what was it like overall? Was it something you were used to, or were there a few surprises along the way?
Well, yeah, it was extremely diverse. There was particularly in the Penguin Cradle Trail, I wasn't prepared for how diverse that was going to be. We obviously started in the coastal areas, and so the dial ranges that come in and up out of Penguin were more dry eucalypt. But then we moved in the northwest of Tasmania, is well known for its sort of rolling, brightly coloured farming areas, and the track does pass through private land and farming areas, so that was incredibly picturesque before we sort of moved into that true wilderness experience. There was a lot of variety on the forest front. The cool temperate rainforest with myrtle and beech and the fagus was amazing. Lots of different variations of water. We had rivers, waterfalls, lakes, tarns, a whole range of things there. And it's always very interesting going on a hike with a geologist, because we had a lot of variation on the geology front, and I got a very solid education from Lauren, who could speak much more articulately than I could on the variation on rock formation. So that was incredible.
I must admit, it is handy when you've got someone who has some sort of expertise, whether it be in geology or plants or animals, to be able to provide a bit more information than that's a butterfly or that's a bird, without knowing what the thing is or knowing what the history behind what you're looking at. So it's quite handy in that respect. What about snakes? Were there many snakes around? I mean, and this is Tasmania, so I would expect the answer is probably yes. But did you see many?
Oh, we saw quite a few. I think I actually got to be the lucky one to encounter most of them. And I, having lived in Western Australia now, have quite an aversion to them because I'm used to them being quite aggressive. So I'd take 2 steps back and scream, and Steph would come forward with the camera and be like, "He's fine, look at him, he's just cruising away."
Yes, we tried to take the fear out of them by calling them danger noodles, but we did see lots of snakes, and there was a couple of close encounters in that scrub bashing section where there's almost no visibility of them until you're almost on them. So there was some close encounters, but yeah, wearing gaiters and making lots of noise through the bush sort of put the mind at ease.
I was going to say, if you're bush bashing through that particularly that hard area, I think you can't help but make noise in that sort of instance.
That's right, yes. We also saw lots of wedge-tailed eagles, and we did see a lot of them, but it was always great when we did. And we had a couple of really great encounters when we were on the summit of a mountain, and where we got to be actually above the wedge-tailed eagles. So being able to see them in their full flight, and we got to be above them and watch them soar off, that was really amazing. And when we were in the coastal areas, we got to see a lot of sea eagles, and when we were in the southwest, we also got to see the orange-bellied parrots. There's only about 70 of them left in the wild, and there's a really great volunteer conservation program that's gone into researching and keeping an eye on the numbers down there, because they're endemic in Tasmania. So it's absolutely amazing to be able to see those orange-bellied parrots up close from the bird hide with a really great telescope that they've got there, and learn all about those. And then we also got to see lots of freshwater crayfish on the Port Davey track. They were everywhere, as were their muddy tunnels. We didn't see as many of the bigger mammals, I think, again, because a lot of them come out at night, and we were asleep well and truly before nightfall. So we did see a couple of echidnas and wombats, and I did have an incident with a wallaby that I accidentally frightened on a narrow part of the track that just absolutely tailed towards me and went between my legs and nearly bowled me over. Lucky my hiking poles caught me, but that was a bit of a strange encounter, getting charged by a wallaby. But I think the wildlife of the whole walk was the leeches that kept coming at us. There was an absolute army of them most days.
Yeah, we did the Gari Great Walk earlier this year, and I've managed to pick up 2, and it's not a common thing for me. I normally do manage to skip them. It's normally Jill, but I managed to be the one that had blood running down my leg at one stage. Without, by that stage the leech had dropped off. So yeah, it's not my favourite animal or favourite creature, but yeah, that's part of the joys of hiking in Tasmania.
That's right.
Okay, now starting off with Lauren, what were the key highlights for you for the trail?
I think one of my favourite days was the day we climbed Mount Beecroft, which is, Steph and I both agree, probably one of the most underrated ables in Tasmania. The views were spectacular. We were able to see all across the overland track and all the mountain range that was under snow. It was absolutely beautiful. It was the same day that we got to see some wedge-tailed eagles. It was just incredible. And another great highlight for me was definitely just the overland track and the camaraderie that we were able to build with our fellow track mates. And they would get involved, and they started pitching for us. They were talking about Mario and Luigi and telling people to watch out for us on the trail. And it was just really, really beautiful to be supported in that way by people who had essentially been strangers, but by the end of it were becoming like a bit of a family.
Yeah. Now, I was going to say, just for those that may not know, what's an able?
So an able is a mountain that is has very clear definition, and that it is 1,100 metres high and separated from mountains around it by having a drop of 150 metres around it. There are 158 from memory ables in Tasmania, and the concept is based very similarly to the Scottish Munros, that there's a criteria or definition of a mountain, because we have over 450 mountains in Tasmania, including some of the smaller polymenas. But yeah, the ables and the ones that the peak baggers go after have a clear definition of 1,100 metres elevation from sea level.
It's good to define it. Sometimes it's sort of it's interesting moving from state to state. You hear the local terms, and I think most Tasmanians know what an able is, but when you've come from somewhere else, it's like, what's this weird term that everyone's talking about? Taking it from there, you talked about your highlights. What about the lowlights for you?
So probably the lowest light that we had was getting caught out in some bad weather on the King William II range. We were walking and we started having snow and we lost visibility. We ended up having to shelter in my tent for 48 hours, and we actually ended up pulling out of that section because we'd been in discussion with our support network on the outside who were looking ahead at weather forecasts for us and talking to search and rescue squads in the area, because Tassie had been hit by some real bad weather. And we took their advice and we talked about ourselves and decided that we would actually walk back down Flutters and not complete that section. While it was a low light, we actually sort of turned it into almost a bit of a highlight, because we were really stoked with ourselves for, overcoming that real, sense of loss that, okay, we're not going to be able to complete this, and turning it into we are completing it because we're walking out under our own steam. We're not being helicoptered out. That week, I think 8 people have been helicoptered out of different areas around the Tasmanian Central Plateau. And we had said from the very beginning that we didn't want to be a helicopter ride. We weren't going to be on the news for getting evac'd out of somewhere by a helicopter.
Well, I was going to say, particularly if you don't have the correct insurance and you have to pay for it, you definitely don't want to be doing that either.
Absolutely.
No.
Now, what about you, Steph? What were the highlights for you for this trail?
Lauren and I have very similar highlights, but I think some other ones was being able to do Mount Ossa. I have done Mount Ossa quite a few times now, but this was the first time on the overland that I got to get to the summit on a clear day, and it was unbelievably specky weather. There was still a good amount of snow on the summit, but being able to get those 360-degree views from the highest mountain in Tasmania was really amazing. And there was a new acquaintance on the summit as well, Zane, who was one of the peak baggers who had done all of the ables in Tasmania. So it was great to have him with us, and he was pointing out each of the peaks and telling us stories and educating us a bit more on the direction of where we'd come from and where we were headed next. And so that was a really fun day, and being able to slide down in the snow, there was a lot of fun by everyone who did that one that day. The other highlight for me, which was an unexpected side trip that we did on the Port Davey track, was Mount Hesperus. So while we were passing through the very muddy foothills of the Western Arthurs, and we got to look at them, and for anyone who's seen photos of the Western Arthurs, they're a very foreboding mountain range to look at. It's all jagged peaks and rocks, and it looks really quite formidable. And I managed to convince Lauren and our friend to just do a little 7.5 kilometre side trip on one of the days up the first of those Western Arthurs, Mount Hesperus. But none of us had done the Western Arthurs before, and so it was a bit of a slog to get up there, but it just provided, again, some absolutely amazing views looking back up the centre of Tasmania and towards Lake Pedder, and then from the other side being able to see down to Bathurst Harbour where we were headed and just see that long line of really spiky, jagged, very crazy-looking peaks of the Western Arthurs. That was really amazing.
And the negatives for you, what similar sort of thing, or did you have something different?
Yes, that section in the southwest was a really hard hit for both of us. We'd hiked 3 days to get up onto the King William Range, and that had been a really hard slog to get up, particularly Slatters Peak, or that scrub bashing we were talking about earlier. And we knew that the bad weather was pretty imminent, but we felt pretty prepared for it, and it just, it got too intense to continue. So being in sub-zero temperatures with no visibility and stuck for 2 days in a little tent, it was such a hard decision. But yeah, my gear got quite damp on the second night, and we just weren't convinced we could really safely continue and dry all the gear out before that next bout of bad weather. So making that decision to hike back out was really hard, but totally agree with what Lauren's shared around, that motivation to be able to get out under our own steam and make safe choices for ourselves and to be able to do it together like that. That was really good. And the only other probably low light for me was, I actually lost 6 toenails when I did the overland track last year. And so I've only just grown them back, but I think I'm going to lose a couple more. So it's my New Year's resolution to grow new toenails.
Well, actually, that raises another question. Were you both wearing boots or trail runners, or a bit of a mix?
Oh, well, there's a great diverse story there, and that Lauren's is a bit better than mine. But I've stumbled onto great shoes that really work well for me, the Ultra trail boots. So I had 5 pairs of Ultras, and I had them all well worn in, but they all fit really quite well, and I swapped out my shoes for each leg of the trail, which was really good. So I didn't get any blisters or anything, just going to lose the big toenails again. But Lauren's got a great set of shoe stories.
I have shocking feet. It does not seem to matter how long I take to try and break my boots in, I get blisters. So I wore a great pair of shoes or boots, the Las Portivas along the Penguin Cradle Trail.
Yep.
Copped blisters immediately. Got to the overland track and went, well, I've been carrying these lovely camp shoes, Tevas. Why don't I wear those with a pair of waterproof socks for the overland track? And I did. I did the whole overland track in Tevas and Bridgedale Storm socks. And then I thought I better put some actual boots back on for the Southwest bush bashing. So I switched to a pair of heavy leathers. And then for the Port Daisies, I switched back to the Las Portivas and a few days on the south coast walking in Tevas again on the beach. It was really lovely. I got a few looks from walking in Teva sandals. People were like, are you serious? Because we had snow, we had snow. It was snowing one day and I was like, no, it's actually fine.
Yeah, I think it's like that's it. I must admit, when I'm hiking in snow, I don't tend to wear very thick and heavy coats. It tends to be just a layering system that builds up to cope with the conditions. And it's, people look at you sometimes and thinking, but yeah, it's, you don't want to be hiking in something that's really thick and cumbersome if you're not comfortable in it. So shoes, I think, fall into that category as well. Now, one final question. What's the plan for 2025?
Well, for me, I've got a couple of hikes planned for over the summer. So I'm going to head back down to the southwest and do the Mount Anne circuit. That's been on my list for a little while. I've got a scratch map of multi-day walks, and it's that one in Maria Island in Tasmania. They're the only two on my scratch map that I haven't done. Yeah. And Maria Island will be a great one to do with the kids because I haven't done that one yet. And then I think I'll go back and do the overland track next winter. I really enjoy doing that in the winter because you can walk it in reverse as well, and it's usually quite varied with the winter weather and very cozy with those huts. And I'm planning a trip to New Zealand to do Milford Sounds, another sort of bucket list walk for me that's been on the cards for a while. So I'm very excited to do that one in February. And then I think we've got some unfinished business in the southwest. So I think there's definitely going to have to be some sort of return to the King William Range for Lauren and I to get from the King William Range to the Denison Range as we'd planned.
You might have to do that one in sort of January, February.
Yes, we'll certainly have to, plan it around the weather, I think.
All right. And Lauren, what about you? What's your plans for the coming year?
I am much more of a person who wings it. I'm not much of a planner. So I've definitely got goals. I set myself a goal to do 30 peaks in my 30s. So I've got a few mountains to tick off around Australia that I'd like to get done. Love to get down to, I work FIFO out of Western Australia, and I'd love to spend a bit more time up north in the gorges near Hammersley. I used to spend a lot of time working around there, but I've never managed to actually get into some of those places that are quite touristy. And I am also going to New Zealand in winter, and I am very keen to book myself into a bit of a mountaineering course because I have a goal of climbing the Matterhorn in Switzerland before I turn 40. So that's what I'm sort of working towards.
Why not? Okay, so we've been talking with Lauren Thomas and Steph Brake about their journey on their Tassie backbone. Thank you both for sharing your experience with us.
Thank you for having us on, Tim. It's really, really great to share.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Tim. Thank you so much.
So that was our interview with Lauren and Steph on their Tassie backbone adventure, which they just recently finished only a matter of days ago, actually. And from my perspective, it was I did not know this trail existed, and I didn't know the Penguin to Cradle existed, and then I get twice in 1 week I have hikers talk to me about it. So it's interesting to see what's out there. I think the thing I liked about this route is that it's very much hiker focused. So whereas the Tasmanian Trail is geared to take into account cyclists as well as hikers, this one's very much hiking based, with short sections joining in between with management road or road walking just to do the connecting points, creating essentially what is a 500 kilometre track all up. On that topic, I've got the links in the show notes, including where they got the idea from another Tasmanian hiker, and it's got some good little maps, and it talks about each of the segments on there. So between Lauren and Steph and the other hiker that they mentioned, with which we've got the link in the show notes, you'll get a bit more information about what they actually did overall. Apart from doing this because they wanted to, they also were doing this for fundraising for Movember. And most people in Australia, and I'm guessing overseas as well, are used to Movember, which is growing mustaches for men's health. And in their situation there, they had personal interaction with mental health in family. So they were trying to raise funds for men's health. And they ended up doing that. They had a goal of $20,000, and they did go past that. If you wish to continue to this fundraising cause, you've got up until the 13th of December 2024. And certainly beyond that, their fundraising page will be closed after that, but you can contribute at any time through the year if you wish to. Now, they planned this trip as a 40-day, 500-kilometre approximately trip, and that's not by any means moving rapidly. But there's nothing wrong with that. I think, again, it comes back to what do you want to achieve out of a hike, or as hikers like to say, hike your own hike. They wanted to take a bit more relaxing time frame. They wanted to enjoy the scenery. They wanted to get in camp early and have time to chat, look at the scenery, and just get out of the modern, fast-paced world. So I think they could have done this quicker. But they had the time and they wanted to do it and have a bit more enjoyment as they went. Logistics-wise, because they were putting 4 tracks together, I think that certainly helps because you've got a start and a finish point, which means you can generally either have someone drop food off in between the tracks or else go through and cache food and pick it up as you go. So that allowed them to work on typically around about that 7 to 10 day food mark at the most. Now, as I mentioned, I had never heard of the township of Penguin, and as a result, I'd never heard of Penguin to Cradle walk either. But it's interesting, coming from outside of Tasmania, I know the big main towns and the well-known national and international sort of known towns, but I just do not know a lot of the smaller ones. So it was interesting to see that. And it sort of sparked a bit of interest in me to at least go through and do some of the walks that they looked at as well. One of the other things that was a bit different for most people is they decided to have a bit of fun with this. So they dressed up as Mario and Luigi from the cartoon or movie genre. And again, walking along trail like that, everyone's certainly going to notice them. And they had everyone talking about them as well and people supporting them, helping them out by telling everybody else. So I think, again, apart from the additional extra weight of carrying the costumes, I think it's good that they can have a bit of fun, have a bit of a laugh as they're going through and hiking, but also fundraising as well. Navigation options, there sounds like there's plenty of choices on this trail. They certainly had GPSs, they had map and compass, they had GPX routes as well. Because it is a route and not a formal trail as such, you can certainly get electronic trails for the South Coast track, for the Overland track, but you may not be able to pick up the other ones that they went through and did, and for that matter, the connecting point. So having the GPX route, which means, you've got a continual point all the way down, you can either rely on the old paper-based map and compass, or you can certainly go through and rely on electronic if that's what your preference is. Highlights for both of them, it's interesting, and I think this is one of the things that people get different things out of doing the same hikes, but in this instance here, they pretty much had the same likes and dislikes. The ability to go up in some of these high mountains, see some amazing vegetation, see some eagles from up above them as they're flying down low, and even as they mentioned, climbing Mount Ossa, and a lot of the mountains when we did the overland track were actually blowing a gale or fogged in, and it's like, well, why are you bothering to climb these things just to say you've been up the top when you get up there and you can't see anything and you're getting blasted off your feet by strong winds? Certainly from our perspective, when we did the overland track, Mount Ossa was crystal clear, and it was early in the summer in the start of the year, so no snow at all. But it's one of these things that you can never be guaranteed doing these summit walks, particularly in Tasmania, because a lot of it is in alpine areas. Oh, sorry, the other thing I'd also mention as well is the camaraderie. And this is the thing that a lot of people don't really expect. If you listen to a lot of the American podcasts, they talk about tramilies, trail families. They talk about developing relationships with people that are lifelong in a lot of cases, just from strangers they meet on trail. So they said that was one of the highlights for them as well. Lowlights, leeches. That's just par for the course if you're in Tasmania. Snakes are there. They didn't seem to worry them too much, and that's a given if you're hiking, particularly in remote areas in Tasmania and bush bashing. And also the ability not to complete that section in the middle of the track. But from a safety perspective, it was the right choice. As they said, they didn't want to be another couple that had to get helicoptered out because they'd ended up with an injury or ended up getting sick or a hypothermia because the temperature was so cold at that time. So, after being stuck in a tent for 2 days, they finally decided to turn around back around and head back down the way that came just to get out. So I think it's one of these things. We've done a podcast episode on when is it time to call it quits on a hike. Now, they kept on going, but they called it quits on a particular section with the intent of going back and doing it at a later stage. But again, at some stage, you need to make the decision about do you go forward or do you go back? And everyone had told them the weather just wasn't going to look good, and they really had no other option. So for me, I found that really an interesting talk. And as I said, if you go to the show notes, the links to their social media, their fundraising page, and also the link to the person they mentioned that they had a bit more track information from is on there as well. So if this is something that interests you, certainly there is information between their blog and feedback as well as everybody else's as well. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. That's all for me. Bye for now.